Welcome to our discussion of chapters 26 to 28. Several of you sent me some private questions, which means there were some challenges in this section. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer you the questions one at a time. Some of them I'll skip because they're very straightforward, but I'll try very hard to answer the other questions. Because there are very many questions, I'll also be quick, and you can go back in the book and refer, and that would help you out. So in chapter 26, the first question was, Dickens presents Jairus washing his hands. And several of you sent me some private questions asking, what is that? I can't get this. You notice Jairus is a lawyer for people who have committed big crimes, who come and pay him all the money he wants, and then they get off the hook. Now, when a criminal gets off the hook, it means some innocent person suffers. Injustice has happened. So here, Jairus washes his hands, and it therefore tells us that Jairus compares to Pontius Pilate. Pontius Pilate is the guy who condemned Jesus to death, and to get himself detached from the guilt of freeing the guilty person, he washed his hands after that. Okay? The other question was really the question that follows. By the way, I need to go back to that first question. Dickens uses a lot of allusions. So I remember telling you at the beginning, he wants students or people who read his books to bring some knowledge with them. So the more you have outside of your everyday reading in general literature, the better off you are, even in history, as you will see. Okay, the next question is about the garlands, the decorations, the wallpaper in Jairus' house. And Pip says he saw these garlands, and this is on page 223, and it says, there were carved garlands on the paneled walls, and as he stood among them giving us welcome, I know what kind of loops I thought they looked like. Basically, these are loops. And Jairus is standing somewhere, you get the impression, where his head is inside one of those loops. So there's a round kind of thing around him. A picture of a hanging noose, in other words. So if you are to rob Jairus' house, you'd be walking around stealing things and looking at the loops they're using, the ropes they use to hang people in London, which was a very common thing to hang people then. Okay, and then we meet an important character in this chapter, by the way, because we had Jairus. Now, you notice how Dickens develops characters also? Pip had been warned by Wemmick, when you get to Jairus' house, pay attention to his servant. When you're reading a Dickens book and that happens, it's telling you this is going to be somebody worth noticing. So we do notice. Her name is Molly, page 225. She was a woman of about 40. But I may have thought her younger than she was. So she may look 40, but she may not be. She may be younger than that. What does that mean? She probably had a hard life. Rather tall, of a light, nimble figure, extremely pale, with large faded eyes and a quantity of streaming hair, kind of wild hair. I cannot say whether any diseased affection of the heart caused her lips to be parted as if she were panting, and her face to bear a curious expression of sadness and flutter. But I know that I had been to see Macbeth at the theater a night or two before, and that her face looked to me as if it were all disturbed by fiery air. Notice her face looks disturbed. Notice how Dickens is now borrowing from Shakespeare, from Macbeth, okay, and describing this character, like the faces I had seen rise out of the witch's cauldron. These witches in Macbeth are really ugly women. And among them, some of the things they were seeing to put in the cauldron where they're making a brew includes different body parts taken out of a baby and so on and so forth. So it's disgusting. So Molly looks like a wicked kind of thing. There's something unique and weird about Molly. She looks like she would be a curious woman in a way. We have to leave that there, but the description tells us we shall be dealing with Molly later, because Dickens spent a lot of time there. Now, the other descriptions beyond here, by the way, we notice that induced to take particular notice of the housekeeper, both by her own striking appearance and by Wemmick's preparation, I observed that whenever she was in the room, she kept her eyes attentively on my guardian. So she looks at Jaggers all the time. And so the questions we should have is, why? What's up? What's going on here? And then she would remove her hands from any dish she put before him, kind of quickly. So she would put something and remove her hand very quickly. You wonder why. And wanted him to speak when she was near, if he had anything to say. I imagined that I could detect in his manner a consciousness of this, and a purpose of always holding her in suspense. So it looks like Molly wants Jaggers to say something, and Jaggers knows Molly wants to say something, and Jaggers is not saying whatever that something is. So there's something in Jaggers that Molly wants to know, and there's something Jaggers is therefore not saying. So we almost feel like Molly is being held hostage here for some reason. So we'll have to find out what that is. Okay. Notice we meet a boy here. We've met Drummer before. And the question here, question number 4, was, what character is this? If you look at the language here, I would just be very straightforward with this. You can go back and look. There's a lot of language here, like Drummer growled, and so on and so forth, and he's very disagreeable, and he argues for no good reason. And then when they walk, Startup is ahead, Drummer is lagging behind them in the shadows of the houses. We've met a character who does this. He kind of lags behind other people in the shadows, kind of follows like a dog, and that would be Ehrlich. And so you get the impression Dickens is trying to, and he does this, take one character and slap the character on somebody else, okay? So it's almost like Ehrlich is back in the story in a different kind of person, the person being Drummer this case. And for some reason, Jaggers appears to like Drummer more than the rest of them. You wonder why. Okay. Now, later on, and that's all I'm going to say here, in the next chapter, in chapter 27, Billy writes Pip a letter. And I don't have to read it. You have the book. If you have the book, you can look there. And the question is, Billy wrote the letter, and then she says, you are ever obliged and affectionate servant, Billy. And then she says, I've read him all excepting only the last little sentence. That little sentence is that you are ever obliged and affectionate servant. We get the impression from this line that somewhere in Billy is still that little hope a girl has, that a boy would eventually come to his senses. So she writes him a personal, soft note, just for him. And that is basically why it is significant. It tells us Billy still has some hope that Pip will become a sensible boy. So we'll have to see if that happens. Now, Pip is living a really interesting life in London. This is question number 2 in chapter 27. If you look in your book, I almost need to explain this a little bit. Pip gives a really horrible description here. It's not horrible in its language, it's horrible in his attitude. It is his tone. We haven't talked very much about tone because we've been out of the classroom. And in this section from chapter 20 to the rest of the book, tone is the voice in the story, and that is so important in Dickens' writing. Here, he says, I began to be always decorating the chambers in some quite unnecessary and inappropriate way or other, and very expensive those wrestles with Bernard proved to be. By this time, the rooms were vastly different from what I had found them, and I enjoyed the honor of occupying a few prominent pages in the book of a neighboring upholsterer. So Pip has made unnecessary decorations, additions to the house. Now, he's trying to tell you he has enough money to reach out and help Joe and Billy and his sister, but he doesn't. He goes out shopping and buys a lot of unnecessary, and he says, inappropriate things. That is unnecessary, really. Okay, ridiculous. And very expensive. Notice those words. And you wonder, whose money is this? Is somebody not complaining about it? Is somebody going to complain about this money? We don't know. So we'll have to see where this goes. And then he says this: I had got on so fast of late that I had even started a boy in boots, top boots, in bondage and slavery, to whom I might have been said to pass my days. Pip hires himself a servant. Does he really need one? No, that's expensive, extravagant, inappropriate. That's why it is saying that. For as I had made the monster, that is this boy now, notice his tone towards the boy, out of the refuse of my washerwoman's family. That is, out of the trash that my cleaning woman, so he has a woman who cleans the apartment. What does he do all day? Other than go to read with Matthew Parker. Does he need a house servant to clean the apartment and all that expensive furniture and the remodeling of the apartment? And then a servant? But he says, I got this servant from the garbage that my washerwoman's family is. You get the impression it's a boy just like Pip was when he was young. And I had clothed him with a blue coat, canary waistcoat, white cravat, creamy breeches, and the boots already mentioned. I had to find him a little to do and a great deal to eat. So there was nothing for him to do, and he was just eating my food. And with both of those horrible requirements, he haunted my existence. So he's just there. A servant, not needed, the apartment already decorated, and Joe still miserable and broke and busy working 24/7 out in the marshes in the village. That is the kind of life Pip is leading. In other words, a life that is very far away from Joe and doesn't think of Joe at all. Okay, now later on, Joe is coming, and Pip is not happy about this. On page 232, he says, as the time approached, I should have liked to run away. To run away from Joe's coming. He doesn't want to be associated with Joe anymore. But what is interesting is Herbert comes up with all sorts of things for breakfast that he thinks Joe would like. And I asked you a socially intelligent question. What is wrong with this situation where Herbert is thinking, what should we get Joe? What should I buy? Would this be okay? Should breakfast with eggs and biscuit and ham be okay? I don't know. Pip, what should we do? And Pip leaves all that planning to Herbert. Problem: this is not Herbert's visitor. Number two, Pip grew up with Joe. He should know, just like you guys did. When you move to wherever you're going to move, if mom and dad are coming to visit, you surely know what dad likes. So you don't have to, your roommate doesn't have to guess. Pip doesn't commit to planning for Joe. This is the point. What is wrong with the situation, or what should have happened? Pip should have gone out, planned for the breakfast, expected Joe, thought everything through, and then made the breakfast and told Herbert not to worry about it. And so in that question number 4, Pip thinks he should run away. He wants to run away. He has changed tremendously since we saw him in chapter 1. Okay, now the next question number 5 refers you back to chapter 22. And the question is, what opportunity should Pip be thinking about in this chapter since Joe is coming to London? Earlier, on page 195, Pip noticed a lot of horses. And he started asking himself, who repairs these things in London? Who prepares the horses? Who does the shoes for them? And if you had a horse and a carriage, there were all these things a blacksmith had to make. This is an opportunity for Pip to bring Joe to London, where Joe would have a lot of business. Pip would be able to support them, help them with taking care of his sister, probably even help Biddy become a lady, if that's what he wants, and so on and so forth. Well, he misses that opportunity. And so when Joe comes, Pip doesn't see all those possibilities of his family moving into London and becoming prosperous. Instead, he doesn't seem to care. I want you to think about this case of Joe coming to London, because there'll be another case where we see Pip preparing for the arrival of other people in London. So this is a parallel scene, and we'll come back to the stuff in chapter 22. Okay, so there are all these parallel chapters and parallel events. Okay, question number 6. Pip hears Joe coming up the steps, and if you look at that section, this is page 232, 33, and so on. Pip just makes fun of Joe coming up the steps, and he can hear Joe's steps coming, and he can hear Joe breathing in the keyholes. And there are all these names in the apartments of who lives here and who lives here. Do you remember Joe's reading abilities? He has no idea. So he's struggling. He doesn't know how to find the apartment. Now, the question is, what does that tell us about Joe? That tells us Joe has not improved in his reading. He is still the backward Joe that we met, although we still love him. So as he is coming up the steps, he can't read the names. Now, the question number 7 was, if Joe was coming to you, if you were Pip and you are a sensible person, where would you or should you have met him for his first time arrival in London? This is probably a very dumb question, but it's necessary because it's a common sense question, and common sense is not common anymore. Obviously, Joe should have been met by Pip. Pip should have met Joe wherever the stagecoach stops. Joe should have fallen off the carriage into Pip's hug or something like that. Pip doesn't bother with that. He stays in the apartment and hopes Joe will get lost in London, which is why he says he would have loved to run away. Okay, question number 8. This is a connection question. Wopso and Joe visit the blocking factory. If you remember, that is the factory where Charles Dickens worked. So he kind of autobiographically refers to a place where he himself had worked. Most people in London, by the way, would have remembered that. In question number 9, this takes us back to page 188, 189. Pip describes Joe's low-class manners or lack of manners. What is ironic about this, and what should have happened? This is the scene where Joe is eating, and Pip tells us basically that Joe eats more or less like a dog, and he doesn't know what to do with his fork and his spoon, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and he makes fun of Joe a lot. Now, if you go back to your book on page 188, there's this part where Pip is eating dinner for the first time with Herbert. And he's trying to, Pip has got all these things on the table with the knives and the forks. This is what the book says, page 189. True, he replied. I will deem it at once. Let me introduce the topic, Candle, by mentioning Herbert is trying to teach Pip some table manners, by saying that in London it is not the custom to put the knife in the mouth for fear of accidents, and that while the fork is reserved for that use, it is not put further in than necessary. So you get the impression when Pip was eating, he put his knife in his mouth, and when he started eating with a fork, he must have put it all the way down, and I guess Herbert had to pull it out with the help of some, I don't know what. But Pip has no knowledge of how to use knives and spoons and forks. He's coming from a blacksmith, so he must handle those eating tools like he used his tools at the forge. Herbert teaches him so carefully and so nicely that this is what Pip says on page 189. He offered these friendly suggestions in such a lively, nice way that we both laughed and I scarcely blushed. Now, if you compare that to what Pip does, he just tears Joe to pieces. about how Joe doesn't know how to use a fork and a spoon and so on and so forth. So Herbert taught Pip, but Pip is not good enough to actually extend the same loving kindness to Joe. Now, on the same note, it is Herbert who keeps asking Joe, would you like to have tea or coffee? This is on page 234. Do you take tea or coffee, Mr. Gargery? Asked Herbert, who always presided over morning. Thank you, sir, said Joe, stiff from head to foot. I'll take whichever is most agreeable to yourself. Joe, coffee or tea? Whatever you like. Okay, that's Joe answering. And he said, what do you say, coffee? Thank you, sir, returned Joe, evidently dispirited by the proposal. Since you are so kind as to make choice of coffee, I will not run contrary to your own opinions. But don't you never find it a little eating? Joe is trying to say, I don't like coffee as much. Say tea then, said Herbert, pouring it out. Here, Joe's had tumbled off the mantelpiece, and Pip goes on. So Herbert gives Joe tea, and my question to you was, who served Joe tea or coffee, and what should have happened in this incident? Pip knows Joe doesn't like coffee. Pip should have made the tea at the very beginning, should have said that, but he doesn't. So imagine you are a prosecutor who has been asked to indict Pip for mistakes he makes during Joe's visit. I noticed most of you in answering this question were very good at going to court and putting Pip on the wall, which is exactly very good. He didn't go to meet Joe. He didn't plan ahead. He was not nice to Joe. Even the fact that he confesses he doesn't want Joe to come is ridiculous. He's got a lot of money and he's wasting it, and Joe is dying in the village, and so is his sister, and Billy is working a lot. He could actually have hired Billy, a maid at home, to take care of his sister instead of that boy he has as a servant who has nothing to do all day. And on and on and on the list goes. Now we learn that Joe comes to visit Pip, not because he wants to, but because Miss Havisham asked him to. And Pip is excited suddenly. And then later on after that, Joe leaves. Joe is very sensible. He can tell he's not wanted here, which is very sad. And eventually he leaves and he tells Pip, we will meet next time when you choose, basically. Or rather, I'm not coming to see you again. Now, if your parent left your apartment in that kind of situation, that would be very devastating. But Joe leaves. Notice at the end of this chapter 27, when Joe leaves, Pip is left standing in the room. He doesn't escort Joe anywhere. This is London. It's a big city. Joe probably won't be able to read the signs back to where he's going. Pip should have walked him back to the carriage. Did he give Joe any money? Not a penny. Did he ask Joe how much money he spent to come here? No. And Joe is gone. And Pip is left with his high class and money. And by the way, we have to always remember Pip did not earn this money. So there is that problem with Pip. Joe is gone. And the question is, when are we going to see Joe again? Now, there's an opportunity for him to see Joe in chapter 28. Now, notice, he has an opportunity to go home, apologize. If I were Pip, I would have showed up the next day or when he goes to the village with gifts and apologies and money. And I would have talked to Joe about how stupid I was. Apologizing, it takes a lot of courage, but it's one of the most important qualities in humans. Anyway, chapter 28, Pip says, I began to invent reasons and make excuses for putting up at the Blue Boar instead of sleeping at home. Okay? So he gives all sorts of fake reasons. And then incidentally, Pip gets to sit in the coach the next morning. He's going to go see Miss Havisham, and he finds a convict. Notice every time the word convict comes up or some prisoner, we go back to the marshes. Dickens is very good at keeping the story alive and keeping characters who are gone in the story. So the convict is always with us every time we run into convicts. And then he actually has a serious description here on page 241 of this. But before that, he talks about the ions of a pattern that he knew.
Playing from Galaxy S10
He
Plus.
carried a big knobbed bludgeon under his arm. This is the police officer who is with these people. So the police are very violent with these criminals. But this is a criminal Pip knows from the past. And Pip describes them as villainous company, poisonous, pernicious, infamous, shameful. Well, so he has distanced himself from convicts by miles now that he is a gentleman. The question continues to be, what is a gentleman? Is it just dress and money? Does just being in a good car and having some good clothes and a cool cell phone and those physical things make you a lady or a gentleman? So Pip, the gentleman, gets to sit in the carriage with these people. And so the questions continue. What is unique about one of the two convicts Pip sees on the carriage? Well, this is a convict we actually know from the past. And where is he going? He's going back to prison. This case is very interesting, and we actually see this in the modern American nation. This is arguing that the court system, the judicial system, is unable to change and reform people from bad people to good people because they keep going back. Some of them visit jail all the time. And this is not just in the United States, by the way. There's a book called Betraying the City, where two people are so much in prison that they actually know which cell belongs to them. So much that when one of them is released at the end of his jail term, the friends he leaves behind tell him, "We'll see you next time when you come back." It's kind of funny, but it's sad. Here, this convict is going back to prison. He's committed another crime. And Dickens is also raising the question of why do people who commit crimes keep committing these crimes? Why? Do they just enjoy it? There are other extenuating social circumstances. Okay. So this convict starts to tell the story of a little boy he knew at the marshes. I've been in these marshes before. I was given money by this convict to bring to an ugly little boy years ago. And Pip gets to hear his story. And he hears his story without really confessing to being part of it or knowing anything about it. He doesn't say a word about it. He doesn't talk to the convict. So what should Pip do since he identifies the convict and the convict appears to be in dire financial and other social needs? What would you have done if you were Pip? If I was there, I would have turned around and told the convict, "By the way, that was me. And since then, I've come into good money. Do you need a lawyer? I know a good lawyer. I know you're getting in trouble, but maybe you can be taken out of this situation." But Pip doesn't. He does not. So he goes out. He goes out and just doesn't say a word. He just sits there and festers. After Pip alights from the carriage, he is affected by the terror of the place, and he kind of thinks about all sorts of different things that could happen to him. He doesn't want to be associated with these criminals, and he doesn't want to be identified by anybody. By the way, notice he says on page 243, he gives us very important information about the character we have been calling my convict. On page 243, and I want to go through this part. So it is the part where the convict talks about the 2 £1. It starts on page 242 if you can look in your book. He says, I wish, said the other, with a bitter curse upon the cold, that I had them here. This is the convict saying, the current convict in the carriage saying, I wish I had those pounds here, because I wouldn't take them to that stupid boy. 2 £1 notes of friends. Well, 2 £1 notes. I would sell all the friends I ever had for one and think it a blessed good bargain. Well, so he says, resumed the convict I had recognized. It was all said and done in half a minute. That is the exchange of money years ago, that the money that Pip was to get. In a half a minute, behind a pile of timber in the dockyard, you're going to be discharged? Yes, I was. So this convict is saying, I was being discharged, I was leaving. Would I find out that boy that had fed him and kept his secret and give him them 2 £1 notes? Yes, I would. And I did. This is funny because this convict was being released, had no money, and he brought these 2 £2 notes to Pip. We get the impression this is not a convict who is necessarily a crook. He didn't run away with the money. But notice there's something else in this conversation. The question is, a more fool you, growled the other. I would have spent him on a man in willows and drink. He must have been a green one. Mean to say he knowed nothing of you, not a half port. That is, the convict, Pip's convict, didn't know anything about me. He just gave me the money and told me to take it to the boy. Okay. Different gangs and different ships. He was tried again for prison breaking and got made a lifer. That means we now know what happened to the convict from chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is how long we have to wait in a Dickens book sometimes to find out. He was made a life in prison case. So he wasn't hanged, but because of getting the other guy, he gets life in prison. What that means is it is possible that this guy is in Australia, my convict. Because after all, they met where? At a dockyard. Guess what was there? A boat. Guess where it was going? Australia. This is what we should get out of that conversation. When Pip gets to the Bulwark, what news does he find in a local newspaper? That Pambuchuk has decided to own the progress that Pip has made. And so Pip is frustrated, and of course he doesn't refute it very, very much. And so it will be interesting to see what happens with this relationship with Pip and Joe. What is going to happen now that Pip is going to Miss Havisham's? And you notice when Miss Havisham calls him, he shows up immediately. He kind of bows down. In a previous question, I asked you why, and I haven't put that video up, by the way, and I need to put it up here. It is the chapter where Pip goes to visit Miss Havisham and he gets on his knees and kisses her hand, which is basically an act of worship, okay? You can see Pip here. Miss Havisham says, I need to see you, and he jumps right in. And in chapter 29, we will see what happens there. I hope this helps with your discussion. I'm going to look and make sure your questions are covered. I will not respond to them individually because it takes a long time, but I'm going to make sure I read your questions and very quickly make sure you did your work. And most of you are doing an excellent job, and I love it. I'm still missing you in class. So I think this helps. This is, it's been 30 minutes. I wanted to make it about 20 something, but it's 33 minutes, so I'll just leave it at that. I hope you guys benefited from this. The copy I am still using, in case you want to refer to the pages, is that copy. You may have a different copy. Check where your pages agree or do not disagree. I hope you have a good afternoon. Bye.